Ladies and gentlemen, we shall start.
Которая называется кредитные рейтинги как фактор развития инфраструктуры финансового рынка России. Наша сессия продлится примерно полтора часа.
We've been introduced at the plenary session to the topic of the credit ratings in Russia.
Председатель комитета Госдумы по экономической политике, инновационному развитию и предпринимательству.
I am from the Accra Rating Agency. I'm its director. Anatoly Aksakov, who is in charge of the economic policies. He is also in charge of the Regional Association of Russian Banks. Ms. Chaikovskaya from the Department of Economic Development. Anna Kuznetsova from the MMVB Bank. And Megaphone Financial Director. I'm sorry, but the sound is really poor. We have people from both the executive and legislative power, from the banking sector. Well, we met here to have this kind of a session. Since we are living through really titanic changes, and all market actors, all market players haven't yet felt all the impacts from the current changes. Therefore, we had this wish to hold such a session. To understand that we are not here for the sake of credit ratings as such, but we want to understand how the whole industry of security markets may change in the nearest future. Gaida Forum here. Gaida Forum is a very traditional start of our discussions in this area. We're trying to discuss the most topical, the hottest issues. And now when we experience some fundamental changes and we need to attract the attention to this sector, Accra now is feeling it's needed to improve the capital market transparency in Russia for the society to understand its fundamental principles and process. And although our Accra agency was set up fairly recently, but I'm not sure that everybody understands what kind of things we already launched. We launched 2 Russian and English language websites, and you can find a lot of information on our ECIA-rating.ru website in Russian. And since December 20th, we offered such a platform for discussion where we discuss the methodologies that we are publishing. And of course, our rating agency was set up as the result of the law on rating agency when it was issued in July 2015. Since until recently, the Russian rating market was the biggest unregulated market in the world, which of course contradicts the current tendencies in the world. And the Russian market did experience dramatic changes, as well as all other markets in the world. And the rating industry in Russia, from that point of view, is not very different from the other rating sectors in other countries, but the extent of our changes is probably felt more sharply because we have not regulated this sector before. Now, Anatoly Gennadievich, we have a question concerning the law itself. Remember, on the 9th of February last year, the State Duma proposed that the bill, and by the end of April, we went through the first reading of that law. Then, by the end of June, the bill went through two other readings, the State Duma, and then the law was signed by the president in August, and the law was really published within a very short period of time. So, Anatoly Gennadievich, maybe you will add a couple of paintbrushes to this dry statistics that I mentioned about the law. Maybe you will share with us what kind of opinions have you heard about this bill when it was still in the discussion, and what do you think about the role of the rating agencies in the Russian Federation? Thank you, Ekaterina. Speaking about the discussion of the review of the bill, I should say it was really very quick and dynamic, but it happened because there was a lot of preliminary work, a lot of preparation that was put into this law, because licensing and registration of the rating activities, about the equality of the rating agencies in the Russian market, that was the issue which was on our table for quite a while. We raised this issue about 10 years ago, and we thought that, well, in addition to the recognition of the foreign rating agencies, we also need to look into the issue of emerging Russian agencies in the rating sector. And therefore, the State Duma had some preparatory work before it went into this discussion of the proposed bill. So, but the risks that were under the discussion were the result of those ratings that were assigned to the Russian industries in the past were not current at that point, and we were afraid that our issuers may experience some problems in the market if they start issuing their securities there. So we wanted to find such wordings in our law that would help us address all the potential risks. And I believe that now the international rating agencies can work in full-fledged in the Russian market, and we want the ratings have more respect from the Russian government agencies. Therefore, they need to get accreditation from the Central Bank of Russia, and I think that because of our joint work, and I want to emphasize that we worked very closely and jointly with the international rating agencies, and that's how we managed to produce this new law. And we believe that the law would really provide an impetus to further improvement of this work for both international and Russian agencies, and the agencies would probably develop more stringent requirements they need to meet even internally when they look back at this law. You know that very many banks, including the Vneshprom Bank, had very good ratings from the international agencies as well, but then at some point they understood that they were facing the risk of the license revoking, and certainly that may undermine the authority of the rating agencies. And therefore, I believe that the market itself, where the rating agencies work, need to pull it act together, and they need to understand what kind of work they need to undertake to ensure objectivity of such ratings. I was always for the improving of our authority and responsibility for those ratings that we assign, and I believe that just one agency, even a very respected one and very supported one, would not do the job. I believe that competition is everything, that the agency should bear responsibility for the ratings they assign. Very often our agencies would assign very high ratings to some commercial banks that would lose their licenses in a short while, and therefore the rating confidence is everything, and the ratings agencies from that point of view should understand the responsibility. We want to have a competition between commercial banks and all kinds of banks, and to ensure that this competition is really sound, and that all banks understand the rules of the game, we need to have a very highly qualified and very authoritative ratings everywhere. Thank you. I want to concur with you. I think that confidence is the basis, the fundamental point of the financial sector, of the capital markets, and of the ratings agencies as well. I think we have some fundamental, some conceptual contradiction there, since well, it seems, I mean, the ratings themselves seem to be very subjective. And if you look at the disclaimer language, you will see that those disclaimers sometimes are longer than the ratings opinions themselves, and you can gather from those disclaimer language that the rating agencies are not responsible for anything that they assign. And ratings, of course, are not a panacea from the fraud. Ratings agencies are not detective agencies, and they're not auditing companies. They only express the opinion of what they see. And in terms of associations, I would say that if I translate that into the language of painting, the rating agencies are not about the paints, but rather about the paint shades. And when you know that you produce a product that is actually a subjective opinion, and when you don't bear a direct responsibility for what you say and what you do, then we need to understand whether the stringent regulation is really justified there, and how the agency and the whole market can survive under those conditions. As we see from the both Eastern and Western experience, the state is the only market players there that can actually fine-tune the balances in the market to regulate the ratings agencies. We see that the invisible market hand doesn't really work in some cases. You have to interfere from the government's point of view. Thank you, Ekaterina, for the way you pose your questions. Now I see that you like art. Yeah, I like everything, skiing as well. Okay, first, I believe that our panel is rather an extended conference or meeting involving the press as well. Maybe it's a brainstorming, in other words, yeah? Let's just consider our meeting as a brainstorming meeting. And the second suggestion I want to say is that I believe that the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank, then if they did not show up for this brainstorming, maybe they should not be provided any funding for their credit ratings work. Well, look, if those who are not interested in credit ratings maybe should not be given any money from the federal budget. Okay, let's just add some salt into our discussion, salt and pepper. Look, we went through a long period of our backward thinking when we were trying various methods that were not involving credit ratings, and we made some mistakes, but we were not really reprimanded for that, because very often those mistakes were justified by some objective developments. Starting from the 14th of March of 2014, we were twisting our brains to understand how we can restrict the allocation of federal money, not only the budget, but I mean the corporations and the government-owned companies, etc. We were trying to find the way how to be more stringent in allocating the money. And we were trying to understand how to allow or disallow allocation of funds, which are expressed in the trillions of rubles. And we understood we cannot trust non-financial agencies that very often do not even differentiate between bonds and securities, that they would decide on their own how to invest their resources. And the government is always telling us that every agency that claims such money, every bank that defaults makes us rethink our approaches. And now we're proposing a new system for deciding, and it's still under discussion. We're talking about the following: that deposits can be placed only into those banks that went through the capitalization review. We do not allow foreign banks to participate. Then we thought that let's just have some systemic banks there as well. And we always based on the capital. But then the central bank warned us that the supervisory requirements to capital, supervisory capital requirements should not play any role there. So the size of capital for the bank itself very often becomes the easiest target for fraud. And we were thinking about various options on how we're going to regulate that. We discussed this with the Ministry of Labor. We discussed that with the other ministries, and then we thought that the ratings probably would play the best role in terms of deciding which banks may get such deposits, or let's say may attract some capital. And we understood that the non-regulated ratings may be even worse than the central bank supervisory statistics. They may be as confusing. And you remember that when the central bank publishes on its website that a certain commercial bank has 100 billion rubles as its capital, it only shows that that bank reported that it may have such capital. and that cannot be really trusted. We now have to use the foreign ratings agencies' ratings to evaluate the creditworthiness of certain banks, but at the same time, remember, now we have the sanctions, and what can we do with it? Shall we trust then some Russian credit ratings as well? If you look their personal sanctions, then they may also affect the ratings of some banks. If you refer to the ratings that were there before 2014, we sometimes think, okay, let's assume that the ratings that were assigned to the bank before 2014, let's trust those ratings. Again, this all looks really false and unrealistic. Therefore, we have to think what kind of approach we need to pursue. And this, we have really a pile of various approaches that are not in harmony with each other. And I think we're pretty tired of all of that. And the Russian issuers do not want to wait until we resolve it among ourselves. But in a year from the time the law was approved, we will have a more stringent framework on how we decide on the credit ratings of various banks and other capital market players. And we know that the law itself is very detailed in terms of how many requirements the management of a bank shall meet and how many other requirements a bank or another player should meet to be able to get a positive credit rating. Okay, we believe that the banks will have to go through a very, very harsh process when their creditworthiness will be assessed by credit rating agencies. And I mean, these almost 2 years of various experiments resulted in the following: that nothing works better than high-quality ratings when we need to decide on the creditworthiness of various agents. And at the same time, we know that the major Russian issuers do not even have ratings assigned to them. Therefore, the law has the following language: that now international rating agencies cannot revoke their ratings based on the decision of foreign governments. In fact, if that act made us rethink our position there, and as soon as we see, so I mean, by summer this year, we will see quite a number of banks that will go through the credit ratings agency's assessment. And we want to see the credit rating agencies accredited with the Russian authorities. Well, there is some contradiction there as far as the credit rating agencies are concerned, something that has not been resolved yet. Now the rating agencies, in fact, need to be an infrastructure to be a service to the capital market players, the same as railroads or the electricity grids, power grids. And here the regulator shall follow the same logic, and the government hopes that the infrastructure will work and will on its own, and will not be highly dependable on the decisions made outside the sector. And we are trying to protect the national interest, and in addition we want to ensure that the capital markets will continue function in the Russian Federation. The Central Bank, Ministry of Finance, shall pursue this goal as one of their main goals. There is a paradox there, that there is a misunderstanding on what the ratings are doing and what they need to do. And although the rating agencies are heavily criticized, that criticism did not affect the volume of their business. They have quite an impressive financial results. One of the biggest investors in the world, who's been an investor to those big three, he said that only criminal business may compete with ratings agencies in terms of the revenues it may produce. And when we're talking about those efforts to find an alternative to ratings agencies in Russia. But remember, there was an article published in Financial Times in last December, mid-December last year, that said that the Basel Committee went through a torture to arrive at a decision, and did not want to proceed with this decision, not to allow the banks to use credit ratings by the commercial banks. But the negotiations and discussions and brainstorming resulted in the following: that the investment community in Russia and abroad understood that the ratings agencies are indispensable infrastructure that allows to reduce the time for decision making.
Whatever your attitude might be, whether you like it or not, the rating agencies will continue to exist until the paradigm of financial markets changes dramatically. In the years of crisis that we're living through now, we learned that there's no successful alternative to that. Elena Viktorovna, the central bank has already been mentioned, and the responsibility of regulating the quality parameters, which is on you and your Department of Financial Market Supervision. We know that you have gained huge experience in that, and there should be no inferiority complex related to that. A misconception is that the global rating industry has hundreds of years of history. This is wrong. Even in the West, the rating sector was born in the second half of the 70s and 80s. In the early 80s, the rating agencies were not named rating agencies, but statistical agencies, and Rosstat in Russia may pretend to have similarly a 100-year experience of such work. Last year was a turnover year for the sector in Russia. Can you sum up any intermediary results and describe the work of the central bank related to the legal acts within the framework of the main laws in this sphere? When such processes will develop and in what way. Thank you. I do not propose any punitive measures by the results of this session. I think that the attention to our panel is caused by the deficit of information, and the regulator Ekaterina does much to communicate with the press, and there's no lack of information and no lack of coverage in mass media on those issues. The new experience for the central bank is that the authority in regulating the rating sector were assigned to it at the same time with the status of the mega regulator in 2013 September, and today we may say that out of the whole financial market, we consider this to be the front line, and the most dramatic changes have taken place here, and they were developing really dramatically. In 2013 or early 2014, we did not have grand plans to restructure and transform this sector. The rating sector existed and operated, but was not considered to be the first priority. Then March 2014 came, and events started developing really fast, and relevant quick measures were to be taken. And as Alexei Vladimirovich said here, we desperately tried in 2014 to find an alternative to ratings, and we spent a lot of time in discussions but found no alternatives. There are, in fact, alternatives, but they are very expensive for the industry. The alternative is creating risk divisions within the framework of each market player, but if that is done at proper quality, that would cost too much, and no industry in the world can afford it, really. Possibly the major ones only can use the approach that the banks are developing now. And we're not only speaking about the placement of public money, but generally the regulatory requirements to the players. About 70 normative acts by the central bank and other regulators have references to ratings in this or that way. And the rating sector really is essential now, and there's no effective alternative to it found in the global community. And we mean here not just regulatory requirements, but the international trend at cutting the costs and expanding the use of outsourcing, starting from the basic tools of outsourced accounting, etc., and finishing with managing procurement, etc. And the rating agency provides the services of outsourced risk management. And I want to reaffirm that ECRA is really outstanding by its experience, by its coverage, and the first impulse to the creation of ECRA was given by the central bank, and after we convinced Ekaterina to take the post, everything went on smoothly, and we saw that there was real demand on the part of the industry for high-quality rating assessments. So the rating sector today is one of the major priorities for us, and we pay specific attention to it next year. The year 2014 demonstrated to us, the regulators, the legislators, that the rating sector needs to be reloaded and it needs special regulation. There was only something like the light version of it in the form of voluntary accreditation, and the full-fledged regulation was developed in 2015, and the relevant law was adopted in 2015, which is rather fast. And profiting by the occasion, I want to thank the committees of the State Duma and the Council of the Federation for their cooperation, and the law was really taken in a very short time. Some political and politically motivated mechanisms were formulated in that law that prescribes the mechanism of assigning ratings. Today, we have about 20 normative acts which are to be developed. The first 5 of them were registered by the Ministry of the Justice at the end of January, and these are normative acts that determine the access to the market of the rating agencies, provisions for the top management, formation and work, and the fit and proper requirements are practically the same. They were previously formulated in the normative acts. Now they are included in the text of the law, and this is the general trend. Now we've prepared a large-scale law introducing changes in different sectoral legislations on sectors of the financial market, requirements for the key controllers and key players in the financial market, including insurance companies and banks, etc. And we are introducing tough requirements to those players in the financial market. Today, about 10 normative acts are being developed. And as for the industry, it is getting prepared for being included into the register, which means getting a license. It's getting ready to work in its new status. If we meet in a year at the Gaida Forum then, and you ask me who will be in the register then, I would not be able to answer. The question often asked is, will the big troika leave Russia or stay in some quality in Russia? Our expectations are, and this is based on the dialogue we're holding in Moscow and with the main representative offices. So our expectations are that the big troika will stay in Russia, and the discussion started during the process of the adoption of the law. A long transition period is prescribed there for international agencies. For Russian agencies, the period is finalized in a year by the 13th of January, and for foreign agencies, this is prolonged. And there are different formats for foreign agencies in the form of branches with a limited possibility of functioning. They cannot perform rating agencies in their own name, and the rating assigned will be assigned in the name of the head company, not their own name. And as we expect that Troika will continue to exist in Russia, these will be subsidiaries set up according to the Russian law and functioning according to the Russian law, and the rules of the market will be the same, rules of the game will be the same in the Russian market for the national and international players. As for the big troika, there's a turn towards Asia now, and we may expect the income of Chinese players too. The Bank of Russia has issued a 3-year strategic documents, trends of the financial market for the coming 3 years, and the rating industry is covered there as a special sector, and a key topic raised there is the recognition of Russian rating agencies in Europe and globally. Surely we studied the experience of such recognition in Europe and in some other countries. Now a topical issue is the recognition by China, as we have plans of public offerings in China by Russian issuers. And finally, the space for the discussion of all those normative documents that we're developing. The expert council within the framework of the Bank of Russia, which represents all the rating agencies, including the big troika and their Russian representative offices in Russia, including representatives of Bank of Russia, Minenergo, scientific community. And as for the industry, we could not come to the conclusion about the self-regulating organizations, but recently a law was taken providing that all the players in the market should be members of self-regulatory organizations, and we pay special attention to that. But in the rating industry, this is not so. We know that there has been discussion of an association, but it failed, and now the expert council is the only ground where we effectively can hold discussions of all the draft normative acts. Coming back to who might be in the register in a year or 18 months. We hope there'll be the big troika and national agencies, not only ECRA, but will welcome competition, healthy competition, possibly some other players will step in. Thank you. Let us now discuss some practical issues. We spoke about some principles and approaches in forming the future structure of the market. What does that practically mean for the market participants? Alexei Vladimirovich made a provocative proposal of who might be given the money or not, and well, this did not pass. But let's discuss the practical issues of it. We mentioned that there's a mechanism of entering on the register, which is similar to licensing, and so in some time a certain list of agencies will be formed. And I have this question to you, Alexei Vladimirovich, and then the discussion will be continued. The exchange is using ratings for the listing procedures, and well, there'll be a list of listed rating agencies. Will that be it, or will there be a second filter when the regulators will choose some of the agencies out of that list to serve its purposes? Or will it be just understood that all the assessments of all the agencies may be equally reliable and could be worked with because presently we know that there are different lists, say, compiled by the central bank, and in fact, the use of all those accredited or listed agencies is such that they are treated not evenly. Will that be the same situation, or will the philosophy change? What will it look like in practice? Let's look back into history. We started using ratings, and we've been consumers of them for some period of time already. Ratings are relevant for investors, and we, as the exchange in Russia, are consumers of ratings and started using them in 2009. This was our response to the crisis of 2008-2009 and the form of our activities within default management. We compiled lists of entities that were not restructured, and we referred to rating agencies. We made a list of them, relying on their accreditation at the Ministry of Finance, and we used some additional criteria. First, the Finance Ministry, together with the National Exchange Association, has worked out the scale of ratings that included 3 international and 4 national rating agencies. We used that scale and included into our list the level of ratings that the Bank of Russia considered to be the top level. Later, in 2014, we introduced the changes and we raised this level by 2 steps, and today the rating for the higher list of bonds will be B+, but in NICE that'll be equal to B. Starting from January this year, we'll be using a shorter list for the new ratings. That's expert RA that will be used as that is for the new securities. For the previously existing securities, we'll use the previous ratings assigned to them. The Bank of Russia issued the draft law on listing that will envisage assigning ratings not by the exchange. Previously it was the requirement of the exchange, but by the central banks. And so those requirements will be formulated by the central bank, but the exchange will have the right of making the criteria tougher. The status of those requirements was raised to the level of regulation in 2014. But yet there are some spheres that have not been yet covered by those transformations. For example, mortgage participation certificates, and today we have similar approaches to it as to the placement of new bonds or securities, but here we may think of toughening the requirements. As for the mainstream, we will be using the same list of rating agencies that have been accredited, but the matter of fact use of the list by some entities will be the matter of their discretion. I'd like to ask about this second filter that you spoke of. Will the government be using it? At the very start I mentioned that this is not the topic, the internal topic of the rating sector. The market participants should have this instrument to be able to plan their work. I want to add up something to my previous statement. The role of the big troika. We spoke much time communicating with the big troika in different formats, just to ensure comfortable entrance for them into the new regulatory environment. In 2014, the atmosphere of communication was rather tense in communicating with the MasterCard and e-banking payment systems companies. Later, the atmosphere changed, and speaking about the ratings that drew more and more attention, we emphasized their importance, but discussed the different formats possible and found a very nice solution. A possible solution might be setting up a legal entity for such a foreign company, rating companies, which could have all possibilities for issuing ratings within the country. There's another possibility, that is a branch or subsidiary. All foreign agencies are practically doing this now. They are performing all the rating operations here, but the data is summed up at the headquarters somewhere outside Russia. But if this is a subsidiary, it should be accredited at the central bank, and then it will have the legal powers to issue ratings. We have two agencies in form of subsidiaries functioning now. I mean, subsidiaries of the international rating agencies. They can sell their services here, and I don't think that the central bank will send detectives to check on what operations they are doing, and will take a bona fide approach, and we hope that such rating agencies in the form of subsidiaries without a legal entity in Russia will function within the prescribed parameters and not let analysts work there disguised as statistical clerks. The recent experience was that the rating agencies sent to us some information on a voluntary basis, which they could do or could not do, and they sent us reports which we read, got acquainted with them, and could ask questions: why did you assign this or that rating? They could answer, or could do without an answer to us. So these are relations which are not binding in any way. So some of the agencies responded, others not, and the sphere was not regulated. As for approach for the future, you mentioned already that it's very expensive for the financial system when each entity has its own risk management service. Generally, it was realized that little by little, major legal entities and other state-owned companies should develop their financial analytical services, but such hopes are not realistic, and surely practically this is something they cannot afford. And we understand that the regulation will formally prescribe some procedure of work for those organizations in this sphere. When we studied the documents regulating the use of rating agency services, and we saw two major approaches or schemes there. First, when rules are prescribed and the central bank places a list of financial institutes answering those requirements on its site, and then that's it. No other possibilities. The second possibility is when the requirements are minimum and then players who really know what they are doing step in, and they may use those requirements, determining the lower or the upper limits of risk assessments, etc. But each entity can introduce additional limitations by its own decision at its own discretion. Previously, they said that, say, at the level of Nizhprombank, some criteria limiting those activities were used.
And currently, we know that the law at this point did not allow to revoke, to get back your money if you deposited the money in the bank, if the license for the bank was already revoked. And now the government supported the solution that we proposed, that everybody would follow the same rules, that as soon as the ratings are assigned, and there will be some kind of a minimal threshold. And for example, some banks would be able to have only deposits from the individuals, or some banks would also claim some other financial instruments. And we had various scales until recently to assess the creditworthiness of various agencies. And we know that we were trying to compare various scales for assessment, but we know that there are Fitch's and S&P's scales, and those are more or less straightforward. But then we have various scales from the Russian agencies. But now we believe that there will be one single approach, the same combination of letters and digits, as we think. And as soon as the agencies get accreditation from the Russian Federation, we will have only comparable scales, and it will be easy for us to judge about the solvency of and the creditworthiness of various players. In addition to comparability of scales, we have another issue that would remain, I believe, forever. We want to have a more uniform approach. If the central bank wants to use one scale, then the other players should also follow the same scales. But another issue is the speed of response. For example, if a bank lost a license, then we need to have two criteria there. One being a default, another one is, and the other one is the license revoke. If, for example, we have a defaulting bank or a bank losing a license, we want to see what kind of ratings that bank had at the moment of revoking or at the moment of default. We want to see how quickly the agencies responded to the evolving situation and how consumers of ratings may respond to that. We want the industry to be as quick as all others. For example, some credit rating agencies have one limit they need to meet in terms of how quickly they respond to the changing situation in the market. Look, I want to involve here and to intervene and comment on some things. Look, there are things that are less feasible. I very actively support such discussions, whether we have such a compact, a limited number of people brainstorming the issue. I also like the more expanded debates, but look, very often we have some misunderstandings about and misconceptions on how the rating agencies work, and we have a very unjustified expectations sometimes. Look, the rating agencies may suggest something, may propose something that the financial community would really love, while people are unaware of their capabilities. And I think in terms of the big three, they are as susceptible to all that. I mean, very often the credit rating agencies, including the big three, do not do enough financial education work to educate the public and educate our potential consumers. But what we started with in Accra, we published everything on our website, starting from the scale up to the procedure for macroeconomic forecasting. But there are things that we really cannot undertake. For example, the unified scale. Look, this is unjustified expectation. The scale is a know-how of every agency. It's the intellectual product. I know that such discussions are on the table for quite a long time, and if we want to relaunch the entire ratings sector, why don't we simplify the life for everybody? Let's have this scale and let's everybody stick to that scale, and the methodology is the same and the scale is the same for everyone. Look, no. You should not have these unrealistic expectations, and the Russian ratings sector is very much integrated into the national community, and whether you want it or not, the logic would remain as such. So do not expect a single scale. Now I want to ask a question of Elena Chaikovskaya, but before that I wanted to respond to the speed of response. Look, technically speaking, there is an obligation for every credit ratings agency. They have to follow particular requirements, time requirements. Rating agency first should develop its principles of activities, then it publishes those principles, but a regulator tells the agency, we have such rules, you have to abide. And then they say that these principles may be modified a little bit, like Gevorg is from the issuer point of view, and he will share that point of view with us in a short while. But look, there is one really very vulnerable point, is the publication and the possibility to comment on something. I mean, and you know what, there is a time on where the information should be kept confidential. Look, but very often those time periods are reviewed, and those confidentiality periods may be affected by the negotiations with the market players, with the regulators in a particular sector, etc. Now I'd like Elena Chaikovskaya to comment on what has been said so far. Maybe we will talk about the comparability of the evaluation scales. Um, I have I did some research on that, and I'm prepared to share with you. Look, I need to comment. I cannot but comment on the following. There are two key principles that made the core of the law. That is, that the agency should be independent and transparent. They should be independent of the regulator. We had very hard debates with everybody, including the big three, because national and international agencies believe that this is the most sensitive point in the whole law. This is the issue of methodology and interference by the regulator, and that norm that now the law has as a very direct statement that neither the Bank of Russia nor any other government agency may interfere in the agency's methodology. So there is a very direct statement there in the law. Yes, the ratings agency should be transparent. The methodology should be comparable to the methodology of any other agency. That methodology should be a good expression of the principles by which the agency is doing its work, and the agency should be responsible for the methodology they are using, and the methodology should be open about its methodology, and that the methodology is followed when assigning the ratings themselves. But the government cannot interfere into the methodology. As far as the mapping is concerned, or the comparability of scales, the only public thing we have is a table that the expert council and the Minister of Finance provided, is the table for comparability of ratings. We are still using it, and we know that we need it. And even before the dramatic events that made us to globally rethink the entire sector, we started to review that scale again, but there was an objective reason for that, because all ratings agencies use various scales. We have the following question. Well, there is a KPI 233 or 233 KPIs that is the market KPIs to the regulators. So the issue of comparability of scales is a complicated issue. We want to ask the market. We want the market to answer this question about the comparability of scales. And the Bank of Russia currently will use a new form of public consultations. And the topics that are too debatable and refer every player in the financial market. We want to publish the so-called consulting documents widely used in the international practice, when a regulator will share with the market its view of a particular problem and its way of solving it, and then would seek the market to comment on that and see how it will all look eventually. And the very first example that we're going to proceed with is the reform of the derivatives, non-tradable derivatives, and we want to see how that should work in Russia, whether it should be voluntary or compulsory, and it will be a consultative document that we want to discuss with the market. First, a very first draft was really circulated between Bank of Russia departments, and after our internal discussion, we will propose it for a wider review and discussion. We assessed the international practice, and we're going to have some quotes from the international practice. We have some results, and we didn't want to have a black box there or a scale of comparability, and we don't want that table to become obsolete in a quarter from now. We wanted to see the methodology, how such comparability tables or mapping should evolve. And again, our approach to mapping, I mean, is not uniform. We know that there are various approaches in the world, and we want to quote those approaches in our consultative document to find the one that would fit us best. And we understand that an option when we will have various tables for comparability is also possible. For example, we can have one security comparisons, then we'll have another table for various sectors. For example, there could be credit agencies ratings or credit organizations ratings, and the corporate ratings would be different. As far as the visualization is concerned, two options are on the table. One is that table produced by the Ministry of Finance when we compare ratings from various agencies, and that's where I want to find the peace between ACRA and the Ministry of Finance. As I believe that we again have a misunderstanding of terminology. We can have a harmonized or a unified scale, but it will not be the one to be used by the agencies themselves. We'll have a universal scale to be used for mapping purposes, to have steps for credit worthiness qualities composed of letters and digits, and every letter or digit would be comparable against various stages of development. And we will see how different agencies would interpret that stage in their terms. Such mapping is widely used by Europe and North America, and we already had such we already undertaken such work within our department, and we are one of the consumers of such mapping instruments. We know that both pension and insurance market will also use such mapping instruments. We know that there is a question of whether such a scale should be public or whether it may be used only by the central bank. We know that the second option would make us less susceptible to responsibility and risks, but we are still aware that the market wants to have such a scale. The agencies and other regulators want to have such a scale, so we believe that we will go public, and we will have to undertake this responsibility for sharing this skill with everybody else. And we believe that somewhere at the second quarter of this year we may issue such a scale. Okay, going back to the issue of the comparability of scales. Well, the main conclusion there is that it won't be straightforward. We can expect easy and simple outcomes. Methodology for ensuring the comparability of scales is a big sore point Look, there is a default and rating migration. The big three says very clearly that the national scales ratings are not independent products. If you read for them, they are not even default indicators. They don't even collect any default statistics on them. And the national assessment scale, geometrically speaking or mathematically speaking, may evolve very quickly. And therefore, comparability scale doesn't really work at this point. I would really say some other things that may look very criminal to you, that whatever we're trying to undertake to regulate things, that one agency may see that the statistics for defaults in various sectors, even from the point of view of one credit agency, doesn't fit each other. I mean, we see that the instruments themselves may produce very conflicting results. Some regional default statistics doesn't compare well against the default of banks, although the ratings were assigned by one and the same agency. And fairly speaking, there are many inconsistencies in how the ratings were assigned. We always believe that the Western markets produce the best practice, but I'm afraid we are not lagging behind too much. The very first regulatory documents in Europe appeared only a few years ago, and the central bank said very modestly that it's trying to follow the ESMA European regulated practices, but I may only say that there are some issues that ESMA is only thinking about, while the Central Bank of Russia is already implementing them. I know that from our accreditation preparation process, there are things that we cannot even find in the world practice at all. So, because they are non-existent. So, all efforts of investment society to find a comparability scale shows that there are very few credit ratings agencies in the world, because the more agencies we have, the harder the issue becomes. Although, of course, we need to produce something. And we have some practical problems for the agencies to resolve. I mean, for the issuing, for the issuers. Look, it may seem that at some point investments look very safe. And then at some point, only because of some methodology changes, the levels may change as well. And there is a cultural issue there. I mean, the rating agencies look as observers, but at the same point, they are the market players in the way they act there. It is a very tricky process. And there is a very fine line there. I mean, the credit agencies may not be too far from the market. They should be involved in the investment society. They should understand what's happening there and should be able to explain their position to the investment community, because that would ensure the market to function smoothly, because consumers should be able to understand the products that the credit rating agencies are producing. Now, Andrei, I have a question of you as the chairman of the State Duma committee. I know that you are in charge of one of the two banking associations. We know that there is one practical issue about the reloading of this function. We know that regulative costs may result in the increase of price of such product, and how a banking community treats the entire issue. Rating for a credit organization is a target, is its substance of work, and it differs from what a regulator wants to get from the credit agencies, rating agencies. Many of them tell us, well, we have very good performance indicators, sustainability indicators, but the credit rating agency still reduces our ratings. I wonder why. It is unfair. Then I call a credit rating agency and ask them why. And then I understand that they analyze the macroeconomic situation and extrapolates it to the potential aggravation of this situation in the, for example, credit rating agency sees that the individuals rather invest in the state-owned banks than the commercial banks. Well, objectively speaking, then the credit rating agency is quite fair in terms of what kind of approaches it follows when it assigns various ratings. I think that eventually it will help us assess this situation in a more objective manner. The banks need ratings to be able to sell their services better. They want to attract more clients. They want to benefit from ratings, while rating agents should also work as a kind of a wolf in that market. A sanitation function is very important to preempt some particular problems in the financial market. And the banks at this point do not appreciate that function, certainly, because you understand it goes counter their main purpose of attracting more clients and raising more profits. And of course, it will take some time before the rating agencies would be able to undertake that function in full. I mean, to educate the market, to make the market players change their business models, and to anticipate various events. And the rating agency should also learn from the market. They should be able to get more information, they'll be able to analyze it and maybe change their approaches at some point. Because you know that we all want to get a full picture and a more objective picture. I would answer your question this way. And that discussion that we are currently going through, well, this is my pleasure to participate in this, because I remember our hot debates when we were developing the draft, and we know that some things are already implemented as far as the comparability of scales from various ratings agencies. I believe that we all need such a table. We all need that mapping, because it will serve as the additional help for the potential bank clients, for them to know where they need to deposit their money. And thank you. You, Anatoly Gennadievich, raised this issue of how the macroeconomic factors may impact the ratings. I think this is a good time to discuss the international scales versus national scale, because very often we think that if regulation is based on the national scale, then we will not suffer from the impact from the political changes. I believe that the logic is quite different. The national scale is different from the international scale, since it may provide you with the rankings in terms of what kind of instruments work within the Russian Federation and how they work. But it doesn't mean that those instruments are not affected by the macroeconomic factors. Well, they are, and they are influenced to various extent. But we said that these relative rankings may be different since they are compared against other instruments within the same country. We are trying to publish a new methodology. ACRA will publish a new methodology where it will see what kind of a baseline we want to follow when we provide a national scale of assessment. Whether we're talking about the new, especially about when we're talking about the new issuers of securities, maybe the Russian Federation should not be the strongest issuer within its own borders, because there are countries where the national issuers are not the strongest within their own boundaries. So the national scale will complement the international scales, and the financial market of the Russian Federation certainly will use its own scale as the main scale, since the main investors within the Russian Federation are the local investors. It is very important to understand that the nature of a national scale differs in its behavior from the international one, because when the sovereign ratings is different, we suffer from the domino effect or snowball effect when all other ratings fall, because we still have a very poor understanding of the ratings and the reasons for their review. We sometimes see this panic within the financial institutions, and this is a serious problem, because as soon as the ratings has changed, people are trying to withdraw their money from everywhere, and we see the collapse in the market.
Mentioned this problem of changed ratings, which exerts additional pressure on the financial markets, not because the matter of fact changes, but because the system of relative assessments has changed in the assessment of the Russian risks. Investors work locally and nothing practically changes for them. The ruble mass will be invested in Russia, but appearances are different. So I have a question to you, Gennady. Should issuers take part in the development of the rating sector and its principal values? And in what form do you face ratings in your work? This is a good practical question. I woke up when Elena mentioned the big troika. In the telecom sector, we have the same term, the big troika. And when she said that the big troika is thinking whether to stay in Russia or not, I felt worried. You are an ambassador of goodwill on the part of the issuers and investors. Let them know that all is well. The discussion seems very interesting to me. I thank you for giving me a possibility to speak, because my opinion about the competition is that there are different positions to the regulation of this sector. I would like to speak about the general successes in the sector and in the real sector of economy. I believe that competition is really essential here. It gives the consumer the possibility of buying the best product. In 2003, on the background of international ratings, we saw Russian analogues appearing, and there were different ratings that could be used and that were coming into our reality. But after 7 years, we didn't see them really settling in the normative acts or the minds of investors. Some time ago, I think that the realization came of the necessity to create a full-scale rating agency. And we see that the issues are ready to help in that. And I wanted to avoid comparison with the International Rating Agency. And surely we see problems related with methodology and the difficult issues in the activity of the rating agencies. We know about the negative experience of Megaphone in communicated with Fitch agency about their rating assigned. And there are such things as the country risk, which are relevant for such sectors as the telecom. Where do we use ratings? We use them in different spheres. First, as the issuer of bonds and securities. Direct equity indexes are not directly based on ratings as triggers, but we realize that surely indirectly the ratings are relevant as the basis for such assessments, and surely those issuers which want to be listed at international exchanges would like to have a higher rating assigned for the liquidity of shares or bonds to be more attractive. The public equity market is another sphere which is quite critical for us. And the Lombard's list is a point of concern here. Starting from 2007 and 8, we've seen limited access to the national and international capital, and the attractiveness of this or that emission or issue or placement was related with the ability of banks to service those securities. And surely we are interested in having consistent ratings, using some same scales and the same rating agencies, because it's not quite obvious for us why should our rating be cascaded in line with the sovereign rating. This is not good or bad. This is just a form of assessment, and the problem is that other forms are not present, and those other forms could be complementary. I do not propose to use one instead of the other. The investor should have the choice, depending on the strategy of investment, depending on the currency it works with. A good investment project might request dollar financing and then will go to foreign markets too. But these are forecasts for the future. Another dimension that is relevant for the real sector of the economy is that we, in our sector, are different from the competitors because we work with the turnover capital quite well. But very often we don't have standard measures to assess the terms of payments to make them compliant. Very often discussing that with our customers, we have to negotiate such things as delaying our payables as long as possible. And when I ask for that, I refer to the high ratings we have and say that our rating is comparable to that of Gazprom, for example, and this sounds convincing for some of the more educated contractors. Another idea from corporate practice is placement of liquidity. This is what Alexei has mentioned. At some moment, we realized that our internal policies of capital management is not effective. Previously, we used the formal criteria of reporting statements. We added up the independent criteria, which is rating. And the combination of the traditional factors and the new factor of rating allowed us to assess the reliability of banks to place our money better. Starting from 2014, the situation has become changing, and practically now we can't guess where it would be really safe to place our money, possibly the federal loan bonds. Or the saving bank. Using all those ideas, I may say that surely in the corporate sector, the structures, business balances, interests are different. We are a ruble-using company with a balance stated in rubles. We function in the Russian Federation, and today we aim at attracting ruble domestic financing. In the past 2 years, we've seen a rapid growth of the ruble bond market and the fall of international tools, capital tools. So, to use the services of the rating agencies, we would like to be sure, first of all, that the three major requirements are fulfilled. That is, independence of the agency. We insist that the agency should be independent to be able to compete with international agencies and not to repeat the mistakes of the previously existing agencies. Analysts and groups of analysts, their level of competence are highly relevant here, and the methodology used, it should be consistent, understand equally by everybody and the same practically. So these are the three major points that need to be reliably adhered to. And in case it all works, I think all will be able to rely on the rating agency like they do in the Chinese practice, where it all started from the national scale, when the normative basis included a number of acts providing for the rating agencies, and now there's a good market of such services, and the agencies, there are big agencies there. Thank you. I initially said that the Gaidar Forum traditionally opens the calendar year of economic events in Russia. Today we meet at the day that finalizes New Year celebrations. This is the day of the old New Year today, and I want to give the floor to the audience now, and while you are getting ready with your questions, I'd like to ask the speakers to formulate after the discussion. We have their best wishes to themselves, to the market, to the agency, to the state for the coming year. The New Year wish. It may be brief or a more developed one. And would anybody from the audience like to ask something or say something? We have the microphone for the whole, and please introduce yourself. To plan our discussion further, does anybody else wish to say something or ask something? Good morning, everybody. I represent the rating agency AKM, which is the small agency that was referred to by Georg. I want to draw your attention to the following. The work done by the regulator and the central bank and the finance ministry has been very impressive and relevant. And we should say that 2016 will be very difficult for us all, because the ACRA agency that Ekaterina represents here will come to the stage of accreditation and starting work. For other agencies, accreditation will also be needed, and they really developed previously against numerous difficulties, competing against international agencies, which was next to impossible. Creating the methodological basis and schemes that would be really functioning. We've been doing that for 15 years, and ACRA will find it very difficult to do it all in 1 year, to work out the methodological basis for the rating of a very huge number of different rating entities. the High School of Economics, Moscow State University, academical institutions will have to be invited to jointly develop all those schemes. The schemes existing at the level of international agencies are too brief and laconical. That is the available materials. But surely, in fact, these are huge volumes of documentation, computer, software programs, etc. In our country, we've been doing that for 15 years. We've accumulated a lot of materials, and the goal is not to lose it. So I call upon the representatives of the state companies, associations, and the exchange to treat it very seriously, not to hurry and take hasty decisions. At the present moment, we have seen that Expert.ra was recognized as the only agency to meet the requirements of the regulatory goals and targets. But this is just devoiding other agencies from such possibilities. We, for example, are a very good agency, and if we ask some partner, will you have a rating from our agency, we're very tough and serious, etc., you'll say no, we don't need this for listing, we don't need this for getting loans, and as for other investor possibilities, we don't need that either. And this is a situation that will be typical for most players in the market. So the year 2016 will be very difficult for rating agencies just to keep floating, to keep some turnover, not just to have statements for the central bank. We are doing what is requested from us, but to exist through doing something and offering some services. Our methodological basis needs to be preserved and used. This is 15-year experience, and no international agencies will share their experience with you. Another point is that our laws envisage limitations on information provision to the rating agencies by the crediting entities. They do not have the right to submit information on the balance sheets, etc., and there are problems that may arise. Sometimes we need to get information about the borrowers' balances. They very often conceal bad loans and bad history, credit history, and in this case, we should develop such measures because everybody expects that our assessment will be very thorough and serious. On the other hand, we don't have the right to get access to all documentation. Thank you all, and Happy New Year to everybody. Anatoly Gennadievich, what will you wish as the New Year wish to everybody? I wish everybody to work much. I wish that to ECRA, to all other rating agencies, and I'm sure you'll survive. As for the central bank, I would like to recommend it to treat very attentively all the players in this market. This is the heritage of Russia. We should cherish and value it and allow it develop in conditions of fair competition. We have created the legal environment which is quite beneficial, and what you need to do is work much and you'll be a success. In 2016, I would like to wish the rating industry and myself too the following. All the processes have been already launched. We've got the impetus, which is rather powerful. We've seen all that we've hoped for, the interaction with the executive branch, with the legislative branch. We've seen the political will. The impetus is powerful. The processes have been launched, and in 2016, I'd like to wish you no bad surprises. We have enough of everyday chores and drives, and I think this would be a very good environment for us in 2016. Yesterday, I sent to the ministries and different public authorities the document stating all the targets for the next year. I wish the central bank to write the normative documents as fast as it can, ECRA to pass through accreditation, and as for myself, to shift to the ratings environment effectively. Yes, I said that ratings will exist as long as people would like to rely in their decision-making on somebody else's opinion. I would like to wish you every possible success in developing your agency, to wish other existing agencies to continue developing, and to wish every possible success to the Russian business. Business is the mirror of all the processes in the country. And, well, I am not against surprises, but let it be good surprises and nice surprises. Well, this is what I wanted to wish to. The year to come will be difficult but interesting, and like to wish us all financial health. I would not like to see inadequate reactions of the business to the changes in the situation. I hope that the year will be more or less calm and quiet. And as for the rating community and the rating sector in Russia, I would like to wish you to preserve the Russian identity and for the long-term period to try to rise to the international level. Thank you. As the moderator, I would like to wish us all to know each other better, and I think that our session today helped it. On the 31st of December, I sent out mail to many of you, although it wasn't as serious as that of Alexei Vladimirovich. I sent my best wishes, saying that I have no illusions that the year to come will be simple. So wishing happiness and good luck is nice, but possibly not too realistic. But I wish you that every day you live should be really effective. Thank you all until we meet again.